Hey everyone, it's Allie, and as I was discussing the endgame with my community on Twitch, we briefly talked about crafting, and it occurred to me that quite a lot of new players and quite a lot of people who are very used to PoE 1 ended up asking a lot of questions as they seemed pretty confused about the new mechanics of PoE 2's crafting. What I wanted to do today was talk about everything that we know about PoE 2's crafting system and to give you some advice on how you're going to want to go about crafting, both in the early game while you're leveling through the campaign and in the early stages of the end game, which is going to make up maybe the first 10 to 20 hours of your end game experience. Now, what we can't talk about here is going to be what mid endgame and ultra late endgame crafting are going to look like, as we just simply don't have enough information about that. But given everything GG has shown us, we can make a pretty good estimation of exactly what crafting is going to look like. So the first thing we should talk about is going to be early game crafting. The first thing that I just want to get out there so everyone is on the same page is that crafting currency is going to be substantially more common in PoE 2, especially while leveling, in comparison to how it was in PoE 1. In PoE 1, for example, you might get 5, 10 alterations at most by the time you're in Act 4, Act 5, meaning that you really couldn't do much with that currency outside of saving it to buy things from the vendors. This went for pretty much all the currency to where you might get really lucky if you see one whole Chaos Orb during your campaign, and you pretty much won't be able to see something like an Exalted Orb until you're maybe level 80, level 90 at best. Due to this, in PoE 1, you pretty much had to completely rely on the ground for all of your upgrades, which didn't really feel that good, as between trying to get the correct sockets and colors and links on your gear and trying to find gear with actually useful stats, it made it very annoying at times to potentially find upgrades to where you were using the same item for 5 or maybe 6 of the acts because you just couldn't find a replacement. In PoE 2, because we're now going to get substantially more crafting currency, that's not going to really be the case anymore. From early reports of content creators playing the first act of the game in the creator event, we know on average you can expect somewhere between 2 to 3 Exalted Orbs in Act 1. If we extrapolate that and assume that we're going to find more and more as we continue into the end game, we can probably expect that in the mid acts you'll get maybe somewhere around 5 Exalted Orbs per act, and towards the later stages of the acts you'll probably maybe even see up to 10 if you get a little bit lucky. GGG have talked about Exalted Orbs and said that Chaos Orbs, which are typically seen as the dollar bill of PoE 1, might not become the dollar bill of PoE 2 anymore, and Exalted Orbs might potentially take their place given just how common they're going to be. With this in mind, that means if you potentially find some decent chestplate in Act 1 that has a decent life roll on it and a resistance that you like, and it has a bunch of open suffixes, you shouldn't be afraid to use your Exalted Orbs as you find them to potentially make that said chestplate into a potentially really good chestplate that you'll hold on to and potentially carry you through all of Act 2. On top of that, you're going to get substantially more transmutes, augments, and potentially even more alchemies and a few chaos orbs here and there, at least through the entirety of the campaign, meaning picking up some sort of decent blue item off the ground that has a stat or two that you like and regaling it into a yellow item and potentially hitting a good stat might actually be a valid way of you finding upgrades. Obviously, you're still going to get a lot of upgrades through just finding decent gear off the ground, but you could potentially now take that decent gear and make it even better, or potentially turn an item with 1 or 2 mods that you like into an item that you'll actually equip because you end up hitting a good 3rd or 4th mod on it. This is also going to be very important for weapons because weapons really scale off of the stats on them extremely heavily, especially in the early few acts. Given you're going to see so much more crafting currency, it would be reasonable for you to potentially find a new bow base off the ground and just transmute, augment, regal, and then exalted orbit into potentially a really good bow that might carry you for an act or 2. Another thing to mention is we might potentially see essences while leveling. We know they're going to be in the end game, and we have no confirmation if they're going to be available during the acts, but if essences are available during the acts, a combination of an essence, an augment, or regal could potentially give you a really good item that you can potentially exalted orb to make it even stronger. Speaking of essences, they are going to be the core backbone of endgame crafting in the early stages of it. Essences are being reworked in PoE 2 to where there's now going to be 2 types of essences. There's going to be the normal variant and then the greater variant of each essence type. There might be a few essences that break this rule, but as far as we're aware, the vast majority of them are going to follow this normal and greater fashion. The normal essences are going to specifically only be usable on white items to then turn them into a blue item with a guaranteed mod on them. For example, if you were to use a speed essence on a pair of boots, you'd be guaranteed a speed mod, which would be, in this case, movement speed. What you could then potentially do with this, and this is how you're going to most likely craft a decent chunk of your gear, is to take a white item, put an essence mod on it that you like, and then use an Orb of Augment in the hopes that you'll get a second mod on there that you really like, and then potentially use a greater essence, which will then take that 2-stat blue item and turn it into a yellow item with a third stat on it that is guaranteed to be whatever you choose to be. This means it'll be very easy for you to make 3 statted yellow items to where at least 2 of the stats, if you don't want to fish too much for a third stat with your Orb of Augment, that can then be further exalted orbs, which, given how substantially more common they're going to be, would allow you to then potentially make a item that will have 4, maybe if you get lucky, 5 really good mods on it. If we then combine this with the new rune system, which are going to be items that you're going to be able to find extremely commonly while you're going around and adventuring, we can then potentially take a rune with a stat on it that we really like. For example, maybe take a rune that gives you cold resistance and then apply it to a socket on your gear to then effectively guarantee another mod on there that you enjoy. This means taking a white item, using an essence on it, augmenting it, using a greater essence on it, and then putting a rune on it will give you an item with 3 and potentially even 4 guaranteed stats of your choosing that you'll like. If we then potentially get a lucky exalted orb on there, we could potentially get a 5th stat that you'll really like, or maybe even a 6th stat if you get unbelievably lucky. And in something like a chest plate where you have 2 rune slots by default, that effectively means on your chest plate, with a little bit of patience of rolling for a good augment outcome, you can guarantee a chest plate with 5 mods on it that you'll really, really like. Between all this, that means it should be very simple for you to make half-decent good items going into the endgame that will allow you to pretty deterministically craft items that are direct upgrades for whatever build you're playing. In the later stages of endgame, we are going to have access to omens, which are going to allow us to do very powerful meta crafting things to our items, such as making exalted orbs give us prefixes on the next use, or omens that guarantee that the next orb of annulment either removes all the suffixes or all of the prefixes off of your gear. We don't know enough about omens other than GGG have said that they don't want to spoil them, and there's some unbelievably powerful effects available to us, meaning that as we push into the endgame, we will eventually be able to effectively edit our items and deterministically craft them into near perfect or perfect items for whatever build we're playing. Obviously, that's going to get expensive as those items are going to be rare, meaning you're most likely going to have to buy them from other players. But from the sounds of it, it does sound like the super endgame of PoE 2's crafting will be as extensive as it was in PoE 1. What I really like about this system changes is that between the new essence rework and the runes, it's very reasonable for the average player in a very simple and easy to understand crafting process make upgrades for themselves and not have to rely on either identifying every single rare item they see for upgrades or having to specifically go and buy them from other players. If essences end up being very common in PoE 2, and given how they work now and their effective one-time use on items, I don't see why they wouldn't be. I think the average player not only will have an easier time understanding how crafting works now, but will be able to interact with it substantially more than they were able to in PoE 1. A big issue in PoE 1 was that crafting was so difficult to do and so RNG, and it just costed so much money that it was very easy for you to just throw a bunch of money at crafting and basically walk away with absolutely nothing. I really like that is going to be made substantially better in PoE 2, and I think a lot of people are just going to really end up enjoying the new crafting system. If you have any questions on any of this, feel free to leave a comment in the comments below, and I'd be more than happy to help you as soon as I can. Or you're more than welcome to come by Twitch and either hang out with our community and be a part of it, or ask any of your questions directly there. With all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope this helps you be a little bit more prepared for how crafting works in PoE 2, and I hope to see you all in the next video.